This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Draft night is done, and we got a lot to dig into. Let me go ahead and roll out that red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Were you as intrigued as I was about NBA draft night, man?
As always, man, the NBA draft was a lot of fun. Some fireworks, but not maybe quite as much as we expected. But I think that's going to set and pave the way for an amazing free agency come July 1. So salute to you and all the fans listeners of NBA Baseline. We have an amazing show on tap, recapping the draft, talking a little free agency. Man, I'm excited, bro.
Definitely. And to help us do that, we got our man from the BK, Bryan Kalbrosky from Hoops Hype. He's going to be on board in a few moments to help us break down 2018 NBA draft night. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning in. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. All we ask you to do is download that platform, plug your headphones on, kick back, relax, and tune in with us. Allow us to give you the butter goods discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warrenshaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week with us, man, we got a really great special guest on board with us. Listen, man, Brooklyn Knights, we travel in packs, man. And we got our man, Bryan Kalbrosky. He is a writer for Hoops Hype. And he's also one of the editors for USA Today. He's going to help us break down the pageantry that was the 2018 NBA draft. Bryan, thanks for hopping on board with us this week, brother.
Oh, I was happy to be here, man. I was at the draft on Thursday, a few days ago now, and I definitely got to see, like you said, a lot of the theatrics, a lot of what really goes into the product that you see on television. It was really interesting, so I was definitely happy to be there, and it was a really cool thing to have it in Brooklyn, which is, where I'm living now. And I was really glad to represent you to today's sports media group and Hoops Hype while I was out there.
Yeah, I mean, before we, really get into the digs of what happened on draft night, what was your overall feel of this particular event happening in your backyard? A few years ago, I was, there when they held the NBA draft at the Prudential Center in New Jersey. And it was kind of an oddity simply because of the circumstances around the New Jersey Nets, at that time, then being transferred to Brooklyn. So it almost felt like people were there pandering to the idea that this was the last basketball entity to be, in the Garden State. But now that it's, in BK, we talk about how the Brooklyn Nets have always wanted to be that legitimate franchise. They still, play younger sister, brother type of thing to the New York Knicks in some weird, twisted kind of way. But the fact that they actually did have the draft night there in Brooklyn at the Barclays, one of the premier arenas there, what was it like for you?
Yeah, you mean I think it's a super wonderful venue. I've always had a good time there. I've seen it in all types of lights now because I've seen it for the Big Three tournament with Ice Cube and Allen Iverson and those guys last year. I saw it for the Jordan Brand Classic with all the top high school players in the country, and I was at the women's game and the men's game. So got to see a lot of the guys who are probably going to be in the 2019 draft. Seen it for Nets games. I haven't been to a concert yet there. But I know that it's a great venue for music as well. So I'm super excited about just the idea of having a place, off my subway stop that I can go and see such premier talent in general. I definitely want to spend more time covering the league out of Barclays Center, covering the away teams too. I'm not a Brooklyn Nets writer. I'm never going to really pretend to be. I obviously, I'm excited about D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin in their backcourt. I think Karis LeVert's got a lot of potential too. But I want to just keep spending more time in that arena because it's, to me, it feels very, very much like a collegiate arena where you're able to kind of get around a lot easier. It's super accessible. You kind of feel close to the action, and that's very much how I felt on Thursday too. I was towards the front, man. I was like they put media on the floor. I was about 4 rows behind where the players were. I was able to see a lot of the way that the players were interacting with the fans before the draft. I was able to see like David Robinson pull aside a few of the guys, Michael Porter Jr. Especially. I saw that interaction. He had slipped a little bit in the draft, and the admiral kind of pulled him aside and said, "Don't worry about it, man. You're going to do fine." So it's just cool to see little moments like that. And like you said, like it's really great for me, living in Brooklyn, to get over there because basketball is such a huge thing out here. It's definitely one of the reasons why I like to live out here. And I've been really grateful for the opportunity to see so many different types of things at that place.
So I think, as we jump into this here right now there, Bryan, like I said, I think those are some great interactions that I'd love to get a little bit further dive down the rabbit hole a little bit here. Now, we see David Robinson's a great admiral. I'm sorry, pun intended, I guess there. But, for the NBA, he really just does what he needs to do and really represents the league at all stops and really represents the Spurs. Did you see him, I guess, specifically, like when you say that interaction with Michael Porter, was it really as a kind of a coaxing situation where he's like, listen, he saw that Porter was down and was upset that he was slipping in the draft?
I don't think Porter was in too bad of a mood, honestly. I thought that he handled it pretty well. I think that, obviously when you're the projected number 1 overall pick coming out of high school and then you end up at 14, you're not going to be in the best mood. You kind of lose a little bit of money on that. But he had signed his shoe deal earlier that week. I think even the day prior. He's still a lottery pick. Going to be playing for a good franchise and a good city. With a good system around him. I think that he seemed to be fine. But I also saw on TV apparently Robinson did a similar thing with Lonnie Walker, who was going to San Antonio because Lonnie also slipped. Lonnie could have been a top 10 pick and. He slipped down to, I guess it was 19 with San Antonio, and Lonnie was like, "Man, I'm not worried at all. Like I get to play for Popovich." I think a lot of the guys who fall a little bit end up feeling not too bad about it. I know I spoke with Jacob Evans afterwards, who was picked 28 for Golden State, and I mean this is no surprise. And I feel bad for all the guys that were picked in front of me, man. Like it's gonna be awesome next year. Like obviously Jacob could have gone higher. I think he could have been a top 20 talent, maybe around. I think that would have been a good range for him. But I think he feels pretty good about his fit, and I can't imagine that too many of these guys are going to be too down in the dumps, especially with this situation being in the NBA next season.
Bryan Kalbrosky joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. And so let's kind of like work our way from top down to bottom. And one of the major questions that I think obviously came from this was all of the hype about the Phoenix Suns and their decision-making process on whether or not they wanted to select DeAndre Ayton, who clearly became the number 1 pick. And I think a lot of that came from this is what would the potential upside be having this combination of Ayton and Booker as a tandem. And the first thing that kind of jumped to mind to me is, are the Phoenix Suns somewhat trying to replicate what the Minnesota Timberwolves did when they were able to get Karl Anthony Towns? They were able to get Andre Wiggins in that trade when they moved Kevin Love to Cleveland. And then they finally were able to get another marquee player free agency wise, not free agency, excuse me, but via through trade with Jimmy Butler. Can we see that same kind of potential with the Phoenix Suns making this selection of bringing Ayton on to pair him up with Devin Booker, or is that more so of a pipe dream when we think about this?
I mean, I think their ceiling can potentially even exceed Minnesota's, to be fully honest with you, man. Obviously, DeAndre Ayton is an elite offensive talent. A lot of people have compared him to Patrick Ewing, and I think when you kind of see him in person, it definitely makes sense. The dude is a mountain. He's really physically imposing. People have kind of had question marks about his defensive intensity and his motor. I think that, in that sense, you can kind of compare him to Karl Anthony Towns, and that's in that way, in that facet of the game. I know Butler came over in free agency, but Phoenix will be able to attract people now that they have multiple assets. It's a city with good weather. They've got a good basketball history there. I really like Igor Kokoskov over in Phoenix, the head coach. He's got a great background, somebody who's been around the game for a really long time, somebody who I'm really excited about to have this head coaching opportunity. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a really good fit. I think, they could potentially have more upside and a longer upside than Minnesota's, because I think that Wiggins is a little bit one-dimensional. he's not nearly as elite of a shooter as Devin Booker is. Devin Booker is capable of putting up, any amount of points in a night. And I think having somebody in the post who can really be a force like DeAndre Ayton can really add to that the dimension for Phoenix's game. And I think they'll be able to keep building. Josh Jackson's a two-way player who can make an impact on both sides of the ball. And I think they're going to keep on going. Maybe add a point guard like Dennis Schroeder, for example, via trade this offseason is certainly an option. Maybe there are going to be other teams in play too, though. But I don't think Elfrid Payton's going to be the point guard of the future there. I think there's going to be a few guys that could be in play as their point guard. And I think it's going to be a good situation for Phoenix, and they can keep on building for a while.
Well, yeah, and to kind of keep with that mantra, so they just signed, I guess, their 31st pick, Ali Okobo. I think it was a 4-year deal already, 2 years on the back end with the team option. I think it was great for them. So nice number to get him and then try to work him into the system. They still have to figure out something, though, with Brandon Knight on this roster. I mean, I know he's not he's not part of the future, but I mean, he's supposed to come back and be healthy and things of that nature. Is he somebody, and again, I know we're talking about the draft, but is he somebody you think Phoenix can, if they're forced to keep him, can he help mentor some of these other young guys on this roster? I know Tyson Chandler is also still there as well, too. But, what do you think the plan is there for Phoenix right now with some of the veteran talent they have as it relates to the young talent they have that they've acquired?
Yeah, you mentioned Tyson Chandler, and I just got to say that I think Tyson Chandler, just a year or two with him and Ayton, is going to do wonders for Ayton's game. I think some guys, like John Wall came into the league in really tough situations with their locker room. And you look at people like Rajon Rondo came into the league and had such great vets around them, Ray Allen, KG, Paul Pierce. I think having dudes like Tyson Chandler who have been around the block, been a veteran for a long time, plays the same position, is going to go a really long way for Ayton's development to make him into a constant professional. And you've seen things with Ayton, like him saying even the other day, like he defined success as his second contract. That's obviously not incorrect. I mean, if you're getting a second contract, you did something right. But I think that Tyson Chandler will give him a little bit of coaching to make sure he gives better answers in the future for things like that. So I would definitely say that that Brandon Knight can have a similar role for some of the young guys. Okobo is a really good point guard. I mean, he put up tons of scoring in France. I think, if he adjusts to the NBA game well, he's somebody that could be a real asset for them, especially a second-round pick. That's definitely a steal. So it'll be interesting to see what role Knight plays. Knight's had a really tough luck with his history of injuries, and it's just not a matter of talent for him. It's just he keeps getting on the short end of the stick there, and that's not really something that I blame him for personally, man. That's something that is just a really tough situation.
Bryan, let's go ahead and get right into the jux to this, which I mean, look, everybody has been talking about this. I think it's obviously been highlighted as far as the move of the night, and that being, what happened with the Atlanta Hawks and with the Dallas Mavericks trading their prospective draft picks, Luka Doncic and for Trae Young, right? I'm really curious to get your take about this. Is this one of those type of trades when we talk about lottery picks that the risk is definitely worth the reward? And who do you really see, just looking at the talent and looking at where the teams are, who actually stands to gain by this move of trading Doncic for Trae Young?
They both do, man. I mean, I think that Luka Doncic can be a franchise-altering player for the history of the team. He's somebody you can really build around. With his size, with his playmaking ability, I think his three-point shooting is going to translate well to the next level. Playing under a great coach in a great basketball city with an owner who cares and is going to be happy to build around him. They got a good lottery pick last year too in Dennis Smith Jr. I think it's going to be amazing. They now have two playmakers on the court at all times with him and Smith. And I think Doncic is going to be a really great fit with Dirk mentoring him for a year or two as well. I think they came out really well there. But I also love it for Atlanta. I really do. I think that you've got a situation where you had a really interesting fit for him there because Travis Schlenk was with the Warriors for a long time, and he's now the general manager of Atlanta, and he drafted two elite three-point shooters in him and Kevin Huerter. And Kevin Huerter is also one of the best shooters in the game from college last season, and they're going to have a lot of open threes between him, Kevin, and Omari Spellman from Villanova, who's a national champion and also a great three-point shooter. So to me, it's just crazy that they were able to add all three while also having Terrion Prince is another good 3-and-D guy. They're building, like I put it on the Hoop site when I predicted this a few weeks ago. They could almost build a version of Warriors Light over in Atlanta. I really like Lloyd Pierce as a player's coach. He's somebody they're going to like for a long time over there. And I think that they both had to make these moves. Trae Young is going to do really well in the city of Atlanta. I think people are going to love him out there. He's somebody that can really give a face to the franchise, help sell some tickets a little bit. So I'm excited about it for both parties.
So as you mentioned that, what we saw or what we thought was going to happen in the draft was that, some teams were going to end up picking players, although they had already established veterans on their roster already. So in the case of Atlanta, you get a guy like Trae Young, and Schroeder's already there. Not really sure. You mentioned that Schroeder. We all know Schroeder's on the trade block, but if they're not able to get that done, can Trae Young and Schroeder kind of coexist with Huerter is there as well too? And then as we go a couple of slots down as well too, Orlando picking Mo Bamba, and would they still have Nikola Vucevic on that roster as well? Talk a little bit about what your sense is of these teams where they want to get talent, but they have talent quote unquote on their roster already with some more veteran guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to need a big man over in Atlanta. I think the move that I'd probably watch for them would probably be with Orlando. Maybe they could try to get Vucevic, because I know that with Vucevic earlier, you've got Mo Bamba, Bismack Biyombo. You already have a front court, and you added another center there. Aaron Gordon potentially is going to re-sign there for a max. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. And I know Orlando does not have a point guard. So it'll be super interesting, man. I definitely like the fit for Trae Young. He could play off ball too, but I think what's really special about him is his playmaking, and that's where I would really watch in the future to see him, be a facilitator, actually have guys around him who can build and shoot as well. In Oklahoma, he led the league in assists, and yet he had no other playmakers around him on the court, which is crazy to me.
I think about the New York Knicks, and a lot has been said, here, and I'm sure you've kind of caught wind of this as well too. A lot of people are kind of split with the way that the Knicks went in selecting Kevin Knox. A lot of people probably felt that the Knicks should have rolled the dice and probably getting Michael Porter Jr. But listen, um, we've seen how the New York Knicks have been when it comes to their talent, the way that they assess talent, and the way that they draft. Do you think that the Knicks got it right in selecting a Kevin Knox and really kind of erring to the side of caution of rolling the dice on getting a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who clearly now we have seen that his back issues and other injuries that he suffered over the last couple of seasons, even for a team like the Denver Nuggets, they're not going to be able to get that dynamic playmaker on available to use for this upcoming season. Is it good that the Knicks actually got someone who's young, upside, especially given the situation with Kristaps Porzingis?
I mean, I think Knox is definitely a risk too, though, because you've only seen so much of him as an actual basketball player on the court. He's somebody whose draft stock went up quite a bit without him actually doing anything different. He's still the same guy that he was. I'm a little bit lower on Knox than a lot of people. He's a really good player. He's somebody who has a ton of upside. I want to note that I was also kind of low on Jason Tatum last year too, and I proved to be very wrong on that. So I'm far from being perfect.
We're not offended by that. That's okay. That's okay. Even the great ones can miss one or two here and there, my man. So it's all good.
Yeah, I saw A-Rod speak recently, and it was crazy. He was like, man, like there's only two players in baseball history who have ever struck out more than I have, which I thought was a pretty telling quote. So I mean, I just didn't think that Tatum's shooting would translate. He wasn't much of a three-point shooter in college. You typically don't get significantly better at shooting when you get to the NBA. But it turns out you're wrong. It turns out that happens. So Kevin Knox, I think I really trust Fizdale. I really trust to know that they're gonna have a really big player here that they need to build around. I don't trust that ownership group very much though. So I like the coaching hire. I imagine that Knox is going to fit in well with the plans, but to me, he's young and a bit of a question mark. Just right how I feel about Mitchell Robinson as well, who did not play in college, and yet still is now one of their picks as well. And I don't know, he had canceled a bunch of workouts. He had canceled on his combine. He's somebody that we also haven't really seen very much of. So it's definitely a high risk, high reward situation with both these guys.
So where exactly did you have Porter on your board? What team do you feel like should have taken a risk on him per se? If obviously Denver took him at 14, but were there teams well ahead of Denver that you thought he should have went to?
Well, I was doing an aggregate mock. So basically, I looked at like 5 or 6 different publications to try to figure out where these guys would land, and it was more to give us a range. He fell in at number 6 overall on that, though, behind Bamba, Jackson, Doncic, Bagley, and Ayton. So I had seen that he had worked out with the Kings, with the Mavericks, with the Knicks. I knew the Grizzlies, Clippers, Bulls, and Cavaliers were interested. I saw that if he was dropping, I didn't think he would get past the Clippers because Ballmer had really big ties to Seattle when he was playing there, based on his Microsoft days and just kind of Ballmer's background. That's where Porter was such a sensation in high school, playing for Nathan Hale under former NBA player Brandon Roy. So I was definitely surprised the Clippers didn't take him, but I knew also that Jerry West was infatuated with Jerome Robinson. Jerome Robinson's an NBA-ready scorer. I don't know if he can do too much else, but he'd played quite a while at Boston College. Granted, it wasn't elite competition, because he wasn't exactly in a major program. But I knew that Jerry West really liked him, so I thought he was going to go to Chicago at 7 for Porter. I thought if he had slipped, his floor was probably LA at 12 or 13. Turns out it was, right below that. But I wasn't too shocked either, man, because when I realized that they had picked Jerome Robinson, I'd written earlier in that day that I knew they were interested.
Bryan Kalbrosky joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to catch him on Twitter at Bryan Kalbrosky. So, man, I mean, I guess when we're talking about the talent of this NBA draft, it's kind of hard to just say, let's run through the line of, all the teams that probably did or didn't get it right. And I commend you because we're running through a litany of different names and a litany of different teams who ideally we're saying to ourselves, you can only hope that they got it right with the selections that they've made. There's one interesting dilemma that did take place, and that regarding the Philadelphia 76ers. They selected Mikal Bridges, and the Phoenix Suns wound up selecting Zaire Smith. And then the 76ers traded to get Zaire Smith, and they sent Mikal Bridges to the Phoenix Suns. Now, the caveat to this is the fact that they get an unprotected draft pick. And I am curious about this because Brett Brown is the president of basketball operations, or acting, GM, as you want to call it. So clearly his input and being a part of the Popovich coaching tree kind of, I would say, has to have some kind of weight to this. But what was your take on this? Because I was a little curious about them going on and making a play for this particular type of trade. And is it realistic that they will use this type of trade to try and land some bigger fish from the free agency market?
I thought it was interesting just given the connections, with Mikal Porter to the franchise. His mom worked in human resources. He went to school in Philadelphia. To me, he's a win now guy coming off a national championship. Ready to play for a playoff team. But the fact it didn't work out, it didn't work out, man. And I think it's definitely interesting. But at the same time, I definitely think that it's gonna be in a situation where they're gonna have a guy who's a little bit younger, can kind of help them develop almost past the Golden State Warriors era, the reign of dominance that they have over there, and also give them a first-round pick. I think that they really like Zaire Smith for good reason. I like Zaire Smith too. Zaire Smith is, somebody with a ton of upside, a ton of potential, an amazing vertical, could potentially develop as more of a scorer, somebody who I think is going to win a dunk contest the next few years or so. So again, I'm super high on Zaire Smith. So I don't think it was a bad trade. And if you can get another asset, I don't know if they're going to try to pull like a Danny Ainge and package that asset. But I do think that ultimately it will be, they could keep building almost like Boston does, where they can keep getting young players even when they're good.
So there's a lot of conversation about who did well in the draft, especially as you just mentioned, Ainge and the Celtics, and they're getting Robert Williams kind of slipped to them, where they were. But outside of that, who were some of the people that you're just kind of scratching your head at? A lot of reports really do kind of seem like this was a pretty good draft for everybody. Everybody did what they kind of needed to do. Do you disagree with that sentiment at all? Do you see a team that they're like, I don't like that pick for them. I didn't understand what they did?
Yeah, the guys that got picked, I think, did a really good job. I was kind of disappointed in Toronto by not picking anybody. I was kind of surprised because I knew that they were interested in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who obviously played is from Canada, went to Kentucky, played really well, improved his draft stock coming up out of college, and that's somebody who I thought I was pretty high on. But he ended up elsewhere playing for the Clippers. So I think it's interesting that he didn't go to Toronto because that kind of just seemed like a lock to me that they would trade up. I'm confused as to why they would fire their coach, but then just kind of bring back the same roster because the coach was such a valuable asset to the Raptors. So that's kind of the part that really confuses me is that they don't really have too much going on in that sense moving forward. Just because I think it's such a tight cap situation, you'd want a rookie who could be a play now guy on a short deal, or a smaller deal monetarily wise anyway. So that was kind of the confusing part for me, honestly. A lot of teams that I liked, honestly. There weren't too many teams that I thought did poorly. I think Portland had a kind of weird draft. Anthony Simons is great, but he kind of does the exact same thing as a lot of the guys they already have. So I was a little confused about that. I like Gary Trent Jr. though, so that's kind of a nice hedge. Didn't love the Knicks draft. I'm not really high on Mitchell Robinson. I could be totally wrong on that though, because I think that he has a ton of upside. But I just haven't seen enough from him. But yeah, I think across the board, man, I think a lot of teams did pretty well.
I do want to ask you though one question though about Grayson Allen. I think I was a little surprised. I mean, I thought I maybe had him going maybe 5 or 6 slots back from that, or maybe early second round. Are you surprised that Utah went up there and kind of grabbed him at 21?
No, I had seen from Tony Jones that he was, basically in heavy consideration for Utah. I knew he was going to be a first round pick. He was a first round pick, so I think that seemed like a good fit for him. I know that he had some beef with Donovan Mitchell in college. But Grayson Allen's he's a win now guy. We've seen what he can do. He tested really well at the combine. He's somebody who has a great history of success, and I think he's matured a lot too.
Man, Shaw just completely stole my thunder, man. I was running
Sorry
right
about
into that. But listen, no, man. I mean, this is we do this long enough, man. It's like we're twinning the whole situation. So, pardon us, Bryan, if what I'm saying. We come at you Siamese style. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of how it flows here. A couple questions before we let you go here, and it's kind of one of the things that we always like to do, especially when we get an expert who's been following the draft and kind of keeping tabs on what some of these players are. Who do you see now that we have seen the draft in its completion? Who do you look at as your late rounder, your Draymond Green style type, where you catch this guy in the second round and where he is lined up with the team that selected him, he has the ability to do great things and really come out of nowhere and surprise people?
I hate to do it, but it's Jacob Evans on the Warriors, man. That guy, in all my interviews, he was the dude that came out at me with the most confidence. He talked about his two-way skill. He's somebody who produced a ton at Cincinnati. I think they're really going to love him in Golden State. He reminds me a lot of Jordan Bell last year. Jordan, I knew, I went to Oregon. Jordan went to Oregon, so we had that in common. But Jordan was just a really hungry guy who I really believed in. But, last year, Evans had 13 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, 1.5 steals, 1 block per game, 1.7 3-pointers. He was top 5 in effective field goal percentage in conference history. His box plus minus was number 2 overall in the conference history. The dude just put up stats. He's a great guy. He's somebody who I think all these teams are going to be we really let him go to Golden State. I don't know how we let that happen. They did not draft a project over there. They drafted somebody who's going to be able to step in immediately.
So last one for me here. When you look at comparing 2 great franchises right now, who both, by all accounts, got very lucky in the draft, which one of these 2 do you feel like has really got the best bang for their buck between the San Antonio Spurs and the Boston Celtics? Now, again, granted, roughly 8 picks apart, so to speak, but just again, Lonnie Walker, you said, was potentially a top 10 guy, or definitely to get in the lottery. He slipped. Robert Williams, everyone's talking about his talent and his athleticism. Of those 2 teams, who you think got the best bang for their buck?
I'm more of a Lonnie Walker guy. He's so young. I think he's just scratching the surface. I mean, he didn't have a great freshman year, so I think we haven't seen too much of the NBA potential yet. but he's a really cerebral player. Does kind of remind me of Kyrie Irving, where he's a little out there as well. But I think almost in a more charming and endearing way. So I'm rooting for Lonnie. He's a really good kid. I like the way he thinks. I like the way he speaks. I really like Lonnie Walker. I think Popovich is going to love him too, and they got a great value there. And Robert Williams, I think he's a good player, and I can't believe that he ended up in Boston because he was a projected lottery talent. But I'm more of a Lonnie Walker guy myself. I just think he fits the modern NBA better.
He is the man. He's been covering the NBA for quite some time now. He is also a fellow Brooklynite. My man BK, all day, every day. Bryan Kalbrosky, you could always catch him. He's an excellent writer for Hoops Hype, and he's also editor for USA Today. And yes, we are suffering Mets fans. Bryan, we really appreciate you hopping on board and really helping us break down and being calm about the excitement that we really should be feeling with this year's 2018 NBA draft session, brother.
Thanks, man. That's just my voice sometimes. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles, so I try to play a little cool,
Hey, it's all good, man. Sometimes we can't be all hyped in the planet, man. Sometimes we got to keep everything a little bit low key though over there by there. Hey, listen, the next time around though, man, we're gonna have to hit up Smorgasbord, brother. We're gonna have to do that.
Let's do it, man. Sounds delicious.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Callie, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. Before we get into the drop, Shaw, excellent stuff by man Bryan Kalbrosky again, bro. It's like, it's amazing that he's in our backyard and he was there for it, covering everything. And, the insight that we have, I think, is really going to be tailor-made for what we're going to be discussing with reference to the litany of free agents that's going to be up for grabs, so to speak, after July 1st.
Yeah, man, a great writer with a lot of amazing insight. Again, he had firsthand looks. He said 4 rows behind the players there, and in Brooklyn in the Barclays Center, man. So yeah, that's a guy who definitely has his pulse on things that are going on in the NBA, and it was a great get by us. And again, what he said really does kind of bleed into our next topic of conversation here. The draft really does fuel what free agency is going to look like. So a lot of names to kind of run through here as free agency opens up on July 1.
Definitely. So let me go ahead and listen. I know everybody is, so that means we're going to start with the LeBron talk. No, we're not going to start with the LeBron talk. If you already don't know what's going on with LeBron James, I don't know what's wrong with you. Okay. We're not going to start with LeBron talk. He's got the NBA world eating out the palm of his hands. We know that. Let's move on from that. What I'm interested in, though, is what's recently transpired, and that is indirectly with regards to Paul George, right? Paul George has some decisions to make. And maybe that decision was helped along by the fact that Carmelo Anthony has opted in on his final year of his deal, which means that he is going to be playing with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, you and I, Shaw, before we started recording, I know that you had some thoughts about where I'm coming from this. Let me just make this perfectly clear. If I am Sam Presti, maybe I would be better suited to not have Paul George come back to play for the Oklahoma City Thunder, to revisit this trifecta, this OK3 style that they had. Maybe because of the fact that I don't know how you can justify paying Carmelo Anthony $28 million for this season, and he is not even a legitimate number 2 guy, because by default, you know that your second best player, if Paul George were to come back, is going to wind up being Paul George.
Well, the problem I see with that is that the NBA has gotten past, what people make as to terms of how that's going to commensurate with their actual production and what the role should be on that roster. I think in some ways, with that went away when Joe Johnson signed his deal. And the expectation is, okay, well, Joe Johnson's making X amount of dollars, but can Joe Johnson still handle that type of level and that type of production? A lot of what's happening with Carmelo is they said, listen, if he opted in, a role was going to have to be clearly defined for him. And I think what OKC has going for them right now is like, listen, we did it this way and it didn't work. So now we've got to find another way to make it work if everybody does come back. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that if Paul George wants to return, that Sam Presti is going to be like, nah, bro, we're good. Like, they're going to go ahead and get that done, and then they'll figure out what they're going to do with Melo afterwards. That's just a situation I think OKC is in. And while, again, it's hard to just to bang your head against the wall and just run it back, I think they're going to run it back in a different way, understanding that, okay, the way they had to play last year wasn't conducive for them to win in the playoff basketball, and didn't get them any near the amount of wins that they thought they were. They almost missed the playoffs when you come to think about it. So I know Billy Donovan and company, they've got to implement some new schemes and some new structure for this OKC team to be successful.
I hear you, Shaw. I'm going to say I respectfully disagree, because I guess when you look at the litany of names that are available in free agency, you mean to tell me that there isn't a better combination that they can try to come up with, or they cannot adjust their roster slightly better where it doesn't have to be solely dependent on bringing this situation back again? I guess that's where part of my deterrent is on this whole scenario is just simply with that. But I agree with you. If Paul George says, "Hey, I want to come back and do it," I understand. If you're Sam Presti, you can't say no to this. But I am saying that if you're Sam Presti, man, you're caught between a rock and a hard place, simply because of the fact that Carmelo Anthony is one of the utmost uniqueness, given the fact that as an opt-in, he is getting paid that much money. And given what he showed you last year, which was a lot of inconsistency, I don't know where you have the opportunity to improve on this team, especially at his position, better than Carmelo Anthony. And you can't just renege on the idea that you're going to look to do something else, because once you commit to Paul George, that's it. I mean, your roster is pretty much going to be your roster.
The biggest issue with what OKC is trying to do is that financially they're already crushed. Like they're pretty much, they're out of there already. So right now they have Paul George's $20 million player option on hold right now as we record this, and that puts them at $137 million. They're already over the cap. So because they have George's bird rights for trading him from last year, they can obviously pay the luxury tax and pay more. They are not going to be able to do that bringing in another free agent. You know, understand what I'm saying? Like that's where they're kind of really stuck. They don't have the ability to just make moves as they want to. They would have to find ways to make some other trades and shed some salary, unless you're trying to get Roberson, which they just re-signed last year, you know, at his $10 million, which isn't a huge relief. Arenas $5 million, Patrick Patterson's $5 million. Again, there's not a whole lot that they can trim the fat from. They can try to quote unquote just run it with Melo and Westbrook again, and that's if Paul George doesn't want to come back. But Paul George has stated, or through Mark Stein has reported, that he was leaning towards coming back right now. So I think OKC is in a very unique situation, only because of what they're already paying out to the 7-8 guys that are already on the roster.
All right, so let's go ahead and shift our focus now with the situation with Kawhi Leonard. And I want to throw something in here, right? I want to throw a little bit of this in the mix, or pose this question to you, Shaw. Of the two scenarios that we're looking at here, which one is safest? The Chris Paul, Clint Capella scenario of returning to Houston, or the San Antonio Spurs basically saying, we're going to keep you here for this upcoming season and then deal with you then, or figure out a way to move Kawhi Leonard? Like, which is of the safest options of these two Southwest Division teams that you can lean on with regards to their quote-unquote free agent perspective?
I think the safest is that Paul and Capella will be back in Houston. The problem with San Antonio and Kawhi is he has a very specific destination that he wants to go to, and it happens to be the franchise that the Spurs organization completely abhors to their entire core. So they have no chance that they want to trade him to the Lakers, and they don't want to trade him even into the West. So I think East Coast teams like Philadelphia and Boston will have an opportunity to make offers, but that's going to definitely temper what they put out there, because Kawhi says he wants to go to LA and only has 1 year left on his deal. You're not going to give up a bunch of assets to make that happen.
All right, let's go ahead and focus our attention on the bigs, right, Shaw? So guys like DeMarcus Cousins, DeAndre Jordan, Aaron Gordon, you know, we've talked about them in patches throughout the course of our podcast to, you know, this past season, but now we're getting really to the, you know, to the nitty gritty, right? The meat and potatoes of this is that these are guys that on probably different teams, they can shine, or, you know, they can get buried in the rubble. You know, which of these guys should we really be looking at if they get moved to another team that they have a lot of potential to do some damage in the NBA?
Well, I think when you're looking at those three, it's still DeMarcus. He's clearly the best talent of that trio between DeAndre Jordan and Aaron Gordon, obviously. Cousins, I think there's going to be three teams that are really, truly in play. Obviously, return to New Orleans is one. Dallas is going to offer him the max like right off the bat, July 1, and say, here it is, come after it, and you can sign it, and we're ready to rock. And I think the Lakers, too, as a backup plan, if they're LeBron, Paul George, Kawhi, situations kind of fall through as well, too. Maybe a 2-year deal with Cousins or something like that, too. Just saw a video where he's on his way back. He's trying to get back for the regular season, at the beginning of the regular season, which I thought was going to be lofty. A lot of people don't see him coming back till January, February at the earliest, but he's pushing to push that timeline up 2 months. DeAndre, I think I think a return to the Clippers is not necessarily out of the question. But I'd give it a 50-50 chance right now, and he really could end up going back to Dallas in that crazy situation, especially if they strike out on DeMarcus Cousins again. And Aaron Gordon, I have no idea what the market is for him. Unrestricted free agent. I don't know what teams are going to be out there trying to offer him some stuff. Maybe Charlotte or something like that tries to bring him in. But I think his market is the hardest for me to read, especially since it's unrestricted.
All right.
Since it's restricted, I'm sorry.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of the drop is we're just throwing out names that might wind up being marquee names, on the free agent ticker, in the next couple of weeks. One of the other names that you listed on here, Shaw, which I really think does deserve some consideration, and really on both sides, one for the player's perspective and one for the team's perspective, Jabari Parker. A few years ago, Shaw, we were talking about how this guy, from a talent perspective, paired up with Giannis Antetokounmpo, they could be the next coming out of the Eastern Conference. Before we even talking about the Boston Celtics, like this Milwaukee Bucks team really should have been able to contend when the Cleveland Cavaliers had Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, and Kevin Love. But his injuries have thwarted that perception and that idea. Now you look at this roster, you look at the change or the turnover with regards to the head coaching. This is a basketball team in flux, and you begin to wonder, where could they improve? Where can they get better? How are we looking at this with Jabari Parker? Should he figure out a way to stay with the Milwaukee Bucks? Or if you are the Milwaukee Bucks, is that the position that you look elsewhere to improve that roster, given what you've seen from Giannis Antetokounmpo this past season?
Again, another great situation for Milwaukee is that it's restricted, so they can match in the offer out there. Reports earlier on is that he wanted to get a max deal. He said, "I wasn't giving them no discount. I don't care that I've been injured for 2 years in a row. I want my money," and that's fine. It's definitely a player's market when it comes to that. They should definitely seek all the dollars you potentially can. I'm not sure. I don't get a great feel for his return to Milwaukee right now. I feel like a team like Utah could be very sneaky. Especially since Derek Favors is also up for them. They could maybe switch that out. And I know Jabari is not a defensive stalwart like in the way that Favors is, but he has a more upside and more versatility offensively. He could slide into that power forward slot for them potentially and be paired alongside Donovan Mitchell for years to come. I think Houston would entertain it if they have to shed some salary to kind of get that done. I think that'd be an interesting situation, especially since they could potentially lose Trevor Ariza. Again, you're going to sacrifice the defensive side in both those situations. But to me, I'm looking at Houston and Utah as potential suitors for Jabari Parker if Milwaukee doesn't go ahead and re-up with him immediately.
You raise a really interesting point with regards to Derek Favors, and he's another guy that I think, given the amount of time that he's invested with the Utah Jazz and the success that I think that he's had, that we thought that he should have more of. Are there any other teams, that should be looking at Derek Favors who he would fit nicely now that we're talking about the offseason and free agency in the next few days?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I wrote something on my site, over the weekend, kind of discussing some of these mid-tier guys more so than the stars, because I'm fascinated by what their contributions are and where they really help themselves out. And Favors one of the guys I definitely featured. When I look at the landscape, a lot of it is just who's going to need his skill set, that 12-7, one block, almost a steal a game type of situation, plays physical defense without the verticality. And it's going to be the teams that could have holes at their big man position if he just wants to dot being a full-time center and not even thinking about the power forward. He's not stretchy, stretches out maybe to 16 feet, but not a knockdown guy and doesn't shoot threes at all. Utah's a very good chance to retain him, especially in this market. Maybe it's a 1-year deal for him, and then he hits free agency again next year. I think Dallas, as we've talked about, they want a big man, so they could look at him. He could go try to be a backup role or in a situation, or maybe play power forward in Indiana. Thaddeus Young is opting out of his deal, so maybe he could go to Indiana. The Pelicans, if they lose Cousins, Blazers, Nurkic is potentially on the move there too. So, and the Washington Wizards, who need an upgrade over Gortat. I think there could be a market for him as a traditional big. They just have to know what you're getting when you sign Derek Favors.
I'm really curious to get your take on this, Shaw. We had Bryan on, obviously, who helped us break down the 2018 draft. He helped us kind of, hone in on who we thought were the winners, who were probably those that maybe not so much as lost out, but just really didn't take advantage of some of the potential that is of this past draft. But I'm just curious, you mentioned the Washington Wizards. And the Washington Wizards, I just feel like completely have been flatlined since they got knocked out of the playoffs. And I'm just curious, we didn't see much of anything from them what they did with reference to their drafting. And I'm curious if whether or not their target should be with whatever comes about through free agency. Is there one or two guys that you think the Washington Wizards definitely need to start focusing their attention on acquiring, on getting, that you think can help improve this roster for us to make them viable for this upcoming season?
Well, there's a lot of guys out there, and that I think can help them. It's just a matter of what can they do contract wise to make it happen. Again, just not they're not one of the 8 teams that have money this summer. So you're looking at minimum deals or guys who are looking to do veteran prove it deals to try to figure it out. I look at a guy like Will Barton would be great for them, to come off their bench and inject some life, but they're not going to be able to afford him. You know what I mean? Even a Contavious Caldwell Pope would be great for them, but they're not going to be able to afford those guys. So what fringe veterans that are available can help them with the shooting, can help them behind that point guard situation. I'm very interested to see what happens with Alfred Payton. I feel like he's gonna have to go somewhere. And again, obviously he doesn't address shooting. I'm not crazy, but I think he can go there and be an acceptable backup. I think he may have to find a backup role for him somewhere this season. Maybe a place like Washington, maybe a place like Chicago is somewhere he can go. But he's gonna have to take a hit this upcoming season to kind of get that done.
Do you think Avery Bradley would be overpriced for the Washington Wizards?
Yeah, yeah. I think AB, he's now the guy I wrote about. I don't think there's any chance he's trying to take a discount. Although he only played 46 games this past season, I don't think he's like, listen, all right, well, I played 46 games and yeah, I was injured, but I'm going to go ahead and take some MLE or veteran minimum. I mean, I spoke to him last year. He was very much looking forward to cashing in. And I think he's still going to command something in the $14 to $15 million range at least. I don't think AB is going to get shortchanged. But again, it also depends where he's trying to go. I think he has an inside track to probably stay with the Clippers. But a lot of teams are going to be vying for his services. He's just one of those guys because he brings that energy on both sides of the basketball floor.
All right, Shaw. We don't often talk about, the teams, the final four teams, right? Teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers, Boston Celtics, the Houston Rockets. We talked briefly simply because of the situation of Chris Paul and Clint Capella, and then the Golden State Warriors. And you brought up something very interesting because I often think that if you're the Golden State Warriors, you have to continue to evolve, with your roster. They've figured out a way to do that. That's the reason why they've been in the finals for the last 4 years. They've won championships 3 of the 4 years. Okay. When I think about the Boston Celtics and I think about how they're in a really, really good place, we also think about the fact that part of the reason why they got to where they got to is because they have Marcus Smart. How interesting is the demand for Marcus Smart, especially given the fact that he's aligned with one of those Final Four teams? We've seen what happens when some key role player, six-man style type players leaves a formidable basketball team, and it affects the total narrative of how good and how deep that basketball team is in the following season. What's the impact like for Marcus Smart if he chooses not to stay with the Boston Celtics?
Listen, man, he's not the guy I wrote about too, and I feel like of these mid-tier free agents, I feel like he's gonna have like just a smorgasbord of offers coming at him. I think the Celtics obviously are going to try to resign it and get it done, but San Antonio will have interest, the Thunder will have interest, Phoenix already has interest, Milwaukee would have interest, the Clippers, Pistons, Sixers, Grizzlies even. I think there's a lot of teams that I'd be looking at what Marcus Smart does because of how he impacts winning. I said this, in the article as well too, and it kind of hit me as I was writing it. He's not a lockdown defender, but he is a big play defender, and he can make game changing plays on the defensive end. And then he can do that offensively in times as well too, with the pass or a timely shot. He's just not afraid of the moment. I think that's something that has a lot of value in today's NBA, and I think Marcus Smart's going to find himself with a ton of offers. But I think he wants to stay in Boston and see if he can complete what they finished. Finish what they started out there in Boston with that young core.
You raise a really, really great point, Shaw, in the sense that what are our metrics now for the point guards to have an impact in today's NBA? We've seen the evolution when we transition a guy like CP3, who's a bulldog on the defensive side of the ball, a leader, but he also marks his territory with the way that he assists the basketball, helps to elevate other guys. And then you look at a guy like Steph Curry, who is the hybrid shooting guard slash point guard. Not only can he give you 25 plus points per game, but he can also give you 7, 8 assists, right? He's more of a dynamic scorer than CP3. And then we move to this transition of where point guard should be at this particular juncture, right? Like we don't know what the next one is. And maybe that metric that you're talking about, that measurement of winning basketball, successful winning basketball, is the next thing that you have to look at when determining if we're not going to get a guy that's going to score like a Kyrie Irving or a Steph Curry, or is not going to have, uber assist nights like a Rajon Rondo or a CP3. Can you give me a guy that's got a game winning mentality where the numbers don't say much, but you always will find him in a game-winning play or game-winning situation that resonates, for that team actually winning basketball games. And that's an interesting point because how do you measure that and where do the dollars trail off of that measurement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And a lot of teams are trying to figure out, ways to do that. Like they're tracking things like deflections and, charges taken and situations like that too. Again, in the article, I mentioned he would probably be the king if we made like a cartoon movie. He'd be Mr. Intangible. And then you could probably kind of go out there and try to figure out, okay, who are the Mr. Intangibles out there, or the intangible guys out there that do all the little things that don't always get measured by the raw statistics, or the raw statistics lie in terms of their impact on winning. And I think he's proof positive of that. Not a particularly great shooter, not a high volume guy when it comes to assists and things of that nature, but he does the right things and is where he needs to be in a lot of ways too. So I feel like a lot of teams understand that right now, and they're going to be looking to see, okay, well, where can I get that value? Are there too many guys out there like that, and what is the price for it? You know what I mean? And I think the price is different depending on where you are as a team in terms of your culture as well too. Are you close to winning? Do you need to infuse that kind of life, or does your culture really suck altogether? And that's why you want to infuse that life and try to get that to infuse some life into some of the younger guys who need that guidance, so to speak.
All right, Shaw. So let's go ahead and kind of finalize this, put a bow on our free agency conversation. And clearly we saved the best for last in talking about LeBron James. So we started off at the beginning of this segment saying, yeah, everybody knows the situation with regards to LeBron James. I don't want to focus so much on where we think LeBron James should go as much as I think where we believe the narrative should be on how the NBA is going to be impacted by LeBron James's situation. I feel like we do a disservice when we do this second go around, not because of LeBron's age, but simply because of what are the expectations here. LeBron James has always controlled the narrative of half of the NBA, right? It wasn't as if he said, I'm going to come over to the Western Conference and completely tilt the scales of talent so that, no matter what happens, the Steph Currys and the LeBron Jameses and the Kevin Durants and the Anthony Davises will all have to go through each other to eventually get to an NBA Finals. It was always LeBron James on one end, and then whoever is out of the Western Conference go through each other. And you can also throw James Harden in that conversation and Russell Westbrook. Y'all go through each other, and I'll meet you at the end, right, for the O'Brien Trophy. What are we saying right now, whether or not LeBron James chooses to go to the Los Angeles Lakers or chooses to stay in the Eastern Conference and either stay with Cleveland or the Philadelphia 76ers? What is actually going to take place here that's going to drive the narrative about the NBA and the competitive level and the competitive nature when LeBron James makes this decision, and how much of that is going to have an impact on the rest of these guys that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes?
But he's going to hold everything up. I mean, that's what happens every year. The top guys just freeze movement for everything. So LeBron's got to figure it out. Paul George's got to figure it out. DeMarcus got to figure it out. Chris Paul, and then everybody else kind of sorts themselves out after that. But when it comes to LeBron and this and where he's going to go and what he's going to do, I don't have even the foggiest idea. And none of the I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago. None of the proposed destinations make a whole lot of sense to me right now, which almost makes me feel like maybe stay put for one more year in Cleveland. See if they can get Kemba Walker over there. And I don't know if it ends up costing you Kevin Love as a result as well too. But maybe you make one more go at it with that not necessarily that roster, but with that city and that team. The Philadelphia thing, again, it's just not an easy sell. Houston, they just have too many things that they need to do financially to make it work. And it looks like the hopes of the Lakers putting together this mad conglomerate of a roster right now, that doesn't seem like it's a possibility, especially with San Antonio just not willing to cooperate in any way when it comes to Kawhi. And if Paul George is going back to OKC, well, what's left? Would LeBron go there with DeMarcus Cousins, and would that be enough to kind of get that popping? I don't know, man. All we do know is that he's going to take his time and make his decision, and everyone's going to have to just kind of wait to see what happens with that. But right now, I'm leaning a little bit more towards it just kind of working out, not say working out, but him going back for another one more year, and we're doing this whole song and dance again next summer.
It's so weird that we get to this particular point. The first time that LeBron James chose to make a decision of this kind of magnitude, he was able to enable, two premier free agent players to one stay at home and then the other one to come join what they were trying to do, in Miami. The second time around, I think it was the level of circumstance. He obviously, wore out his welcome with Pat Riley. Pat Riley was not going to roll out the red carpet for him. And he decided, this was probably the best time for me to make good on a promise that I made as a kid. I'm going to bring a championship to the Cleveland Cavaliers. This time around, it's kind of weird because, we were trying to make comparisons a few years ago, Shaw, with, Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James about, that was the LeBron James kryptonite, so to speak, was Kawhi Leonard. And now there's all of this craziness about the possibilities of Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James coming to the Lakers if they could figure out a way to get Kawhi Leonard and this, that, and the third. It's just really crazy to me that we've gotten ourselves to this point, that this is where the narrative of the storyline, so to speak, has been written out when we're talking about LeBron James, the best player in basketball, and how his decision-making process can impact where everything else kind of falls.
Yeah, well, it does. Again, it's just who he is and what he's kind of done to the league. He's transformed it in that way. And the fact that he's just so smart from a business standpoint and signs these short deals where he can always continue to get the most amount of money each and every single year, is something that is just unprecedented. And you're going to just see that kind of unfold with superstars as they enter the league moving forward. We don't need to get, unless you're injury prone or necessarily maybe just not quite as good, you may continue to sign 2-year deals. Like, all right, I want an option. I want to be able to get more money of the cap. I want to get that 33% or whatever it is of the cap each year because the cap continues to rise. And then when it's kind of flatlines after at some point, it's like, all right, well, now I know I'm going to stay here for 2 or 3 years, without having options, so to speak. The interesting thing, though, is I think if the Lakers can exercise a little bit of patience, really and truly, but I'm going to say this and then kind of contradict myself, they exercise a little bit of patience, they can get LeBron and Kawhi flat out, in 19 and 20. So if they play 18-19, just do whatever they need to do, maybe whatever, get in the lottery again and whatever else happens, Kawhi can sign there outright, the following season. You could even look at Kyrie Irving if you wanted to the following season. LeBron, again, I know LeBron and Kyrie aren't going to come back and play together, but again, the options become so much that more open for you if you can exercise patience as opposed to having to give up what you need to give up right now to get Kawhi there. And if LeBron's not coming with another star, then what purpose does it do you to get him a year early when you can't be at a competitive level?
And I'm telling you, man, it's all good, man. It's so juicy, man. And July 1st, right around the bend, man. Cannot wait for all of the action to take place. Good stuff all around. Like to thank our special guest, Bryan Kalbrosky. Be sure to check him out at Hoops Hype, editor for USA Today. Thank you so much for hopping on board and giving us the insight with the 2018 draft. For the baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Summer's hot and the NBA is ready to ride, and we'll be there with you every step of the way. And we'll catch up with you next time.